Good afternoon, everybody. It's Dr. Michelle coming to you from Dirigo Food Safety. It is time for our Salt Cured Pig office hours. It is, I guess, 4 o'clock here on the East Coast. I don't even know where the day went, my friends. I'm delighted to have you here to talk about our third step of HACCP. You know, I know we're playing around with the times and stuff like that of when we're doing this to see when we can get the best audience. Of course, these are all recorded, so it's okay. It's just whether or not you want to ask questions live during the presentation. So we're going to be covering some really key questions, both from a business perspective and from a food safety perspective, from the HACCP perspective of who do you sell to, because it's really important. So I'll give everybody a minute to show up, and then we will dive right on in. I don't know if we're going to spend a whole half hour here together. I am, of course, always open for questions. We've had some interesting discussions on the page this week about refrigeration temperatures, so I'm going to discuss that at the end of our presentation because there are some things that we do here in America. All right, so with that, I think I'll just kind of dive right on in. If you're having trouble hearing me, somebody please let me know. That would be great. But other than that, I'm hoping all of this AV setup that I have, you know, they never tell you when you're going into business all the things that you're supposed to get good at. And social media and AV setups turns out to be one of them. I was not one of the AV kids in high school, I have to tell you. So anyway, so again, welcome. I'm Dr. Michelle Fanon-Steele. This is Salt Cured Pig office hours, and this quarter we are covering the 12 steps of HACCP during our weekly office hours, where I come to you and I try and vomit all of my information on you because I can. Because we get so many questions, and it's nice to have kind of like a bank of information that I can send people to with, I hope, reasonably easy to consume media to answer their HACCP questions. And so without further ado, let's talk about step 3 of HACCP. Okay, and so this is the third in our series, and the first one was talking about your food safety team. Last week we talked about defining your food. I just did another presentation for that over for my business page if you want to talk a little bit more about specifications. That'll be going up at the kind of end of the week. And then today here at Salt Cured Pig, we're going to be talking about your intended consumer. Okay, now in HACCP planning, in USDA HACCP planning, your intended consumer is step 3 of the 5 pre-steps of HACCP. Okay, and next week we're going to be covering how to do process flow diagramming for the bacon process we started last week. And the reason that we talk about who your intended consumer is because there are really significant food safety implications around your intended consumer, because not all consumers are created equal. And there are actually 2 ways we need to approach this as businesses. We need to approach our intended consumer as the people who actually eat our food, okay, because you have to design food safety for them. And then our target market. All right, so let's, you know, we could start in either spot, but you know, I don't know how many of you know, I'm actually a business coach in addition to being a food safety subject matter expert, is I guess what I'm called, and I'm an expert in a business and marketing system called Book Yourself Solid, and I'd be totally happy to talk to anybody about marketing and sales and all that good sort of stuff. But in our system over at Book Yourself Solid, the first thing that we do is we talk about a target market, because any business, whether you are selling bacon or you are selling food safety services or you're selling t-shirts, you have to have somebody to whom you are selling who is going to trade their hard-earned money for your particular product, right? And we call that a target market. I mean, everybody calls that a target market. And you have to define who your target market is, okay? The target market is the people who give you money. So if you are in a not-for-profit, your target market is the people who buy from you, okay? If you are selling to institutions, the target market is the people who buy from you. That may or may not be your intended consumer, especially if you sell to institutions. If you are selling bacon to hospitals. It is the procurement office for food that's buying your product, and your intended consumer are the people who are eating your product, all right? But to get to your intended consumer, you must get to your target market first, okay? So let's talk about target market first. For many of you who are in retail sales, your target market is your intended consumer, and that's totally amazing, because then you don't have to like split messaging and things like that. So your target market is the people who actually pay you for your product, okay? And try and make that people you like, okay? If you are going into business and you are trying to decide who you want to sell to, take a step back and say, who do I like hanging out with, okay? There is a world of difference depending on whether or not you want to go hang out at the farmer's market, if you want to work with retail customers at a retail butcher counter, or you want to do wholesale sales, okay? You are going to be having vastly different conversations with people who are going to give you money, and you need to know that at the beginning. You can make the exact same product, but your marketing and sales will be so much better if you are showing up to the people that you like. If you hate the farmer's market, do not make that your target market, okay? Like, if I was in food production, you couldn't pay me enough to go to a farmer's market, okay? There's a reason I work with wholesalers. And so, but knowing that and knowing how you want to spend your time and who you're going to spend your time with is incredibly important as you go into your into your food production and food safety planning, okay? Because we spend 80% of our lives with the people that we work with. We might as well like them. Okay, which is why I'm here with you, because I love you all. Okay, and so if your target market is people that you like hanging out with, you're going to be able to show up to that target market a heck of a lot better. And it is in the showing up that we actually drive our businesses forward. Okay, it is our job to go out and figure out who are the people we are meant to serve with our food, and we find them and we serve them. Okay, and that's defining your target market. Try and make it people that you like and that are capitalized enough to pay for you. Okay, don't, as my father used to say, don't sell to undercapitalized pockets, because then you'll never get paid. So that's your target market, okay? And then you have to decide what you're making, all right? We talked about that last week. What do you make? You know, people don't buy bacon. They buy a solution to a problem. Whether you're buying food safety systems, you're buying t-shirts, or you're buying bacon, people buy a solution to a problem, okay? If you're selling into institutions, your institution that you're selling to is buying a solution to a problem, and that solution is your food, and you should be able to identify the benefits of that, the financial benefits, the emotional benefits of your food, the physical benefits of your food, okay? You know, the food that we make is amazing food, and it can be really good for us, no matter what you're, think about whether or not you should be eating meat. And then finally, the spiritual benefits. We actually talk about this a lot on the Salt Cured Pig, like the idea about creating regenerative, resilient local agriculture. I mean, for a lot of people, that's a spiritual benefit that's really meaningful, okay? So you got to be able to go and talk about that sort of thing in a manner that your target market understands, okay? So that's kind of the marketing and sales side of target marketing. And now I want to talk about your intended consumer. So in food safety planning, your intended consumer is the person who's eating your food, okay? And so as you are creating your business plan, you have to be able to identify that. And as you are creating your food safety plan, you have to be able to identify that, okay? And the reason this is important is because you have to do your food safety planning in conformance with how your consumer is consuming your food. And the most famous case around this is these many years ago, like probably in the 90s, when Nestle came out with tubes of chocolate chip cookie dough, okay? Some of you probably remember that. Or all of a sudden, you could go to the grocery store and you could buy these like tubes of chocolate chip cookie dough. Well, what did everybody do? They went and they got tubes of chocolate chip cookie dough, and they sat down in whatever we had before we had Netflix, and they got a spoon and they went, and they ate raw cookie dough, right? Because we all eat raw cookie dough. I mean, dude, like, I make all my own food. My kids eat so much raw flour. I'm like, oh my God, we're all going to die of Shiga toxin E. coli, and that's going to be really bad for business now, isn't it? But they ate all this raw cookie dough, and they got salmonella because it didn't use pasteurized eggs, because Nestle, in its court case when they got sued, said, but it's raw cookie dough. It's not meant to be consumed raw. It's meant to be consumed cooked in the form of cookies. And the judge did not care. Okay. They had to make cookie dough as a ready-to-eat food. Okay. So for all of you people who are making doughs out there, case law says you got to make that as ready-to-eat food, because people eat dough raw here in America. That is our culture. We eat dough raw. Where that came from, I have no idea. But I'm as guilty as anybody else. And so that's what I mean by talking about your intended consumer and how they consume your food. And you have to do food safety planning associated with that. Okay. There are plenty of people who argue about this, and I am here to tell you that it's almost not worth it. And of course, Jake is bringing up the one exception to that is not ready to eat raw chicken. Okay. There are no, believe it or not, cultures out there that eat poultry raw. All right. You do not have to plan for ready to eat raw chicken. You should not plan for ready to eat ground beef, because that would be impossible. And there are a few other exceptions, but I will tell you, if you know that your consumer is consuming your product raw, you have to create it as a ready-to-eat food, because it's almost impossible to defend against if you aren't. Okay, we run into this in fisheries all the time. I work with a lot of local fishermen, and they sell to local restaurants, and those local restaurants do not have a freezing cabinet. And those local fisheries know that their fish is being consumed raw when it's not being prepared as if it is a sushi product. We have to freeze sushi to get rid of parasites and do, some other things. And so if you know that, and you are not making it to a ready-to-eat standard, the best answer I have come up with is to have a really clear and concise specification that says this is a ready-to-cook product, and you make your buyer sign that spec, that they are acknowledging that this is a ready-to-cook product. And if they are then not cooking it, then it's on them and it's not on you. Because there's a limited amount you can do out in the marketplace with your food. But if you really think that that's an issue, that somebody's going to be eating your product that you are making as not ready to eat, and they are eating it as ready to eat, then get a spec, have them sign it, and do the very best that you can, and that's what you can do. We got to operate in the marketplace as it exists. So I hope that answers your questions, Jake. Your question, Jake, about ready to eat raw chicken. No, here actually, what's fun is here in America, you still only have to cook chicken to 165 degrees to kill salmonella, but culturally, we actually eat it between 180 and 185 degrees is how most people actually like their chicken. So I do not like chicken that's been cooked to 165 because it's gross. All right, that's the only thing that I like cooked to 185. The rest of you, don't worry, I'm not at the well-cooked end of the steak spectrum. Practically mooing, if you ask my husband. So anyway, so your intended consumer, you have to be able to understand how they are actually using your food. In USDA processing, then there are some other things that you have to take into consideration with your intended consumer. They ask you, are you selling to institutions? And the reason that's important is because by and large, people who are in institutions are either immunocompromised, so they're in the hospital, and they're in the hospital because they're sick, or they're immunocompetent. If you sell into the school lunch program, 5-year-olds just simply don't have the same immune system as a 25-year-old, which I think everybody can probably get behind. And so you have to do extra food safety planning depending on whether or not you have an immunocompetent population, okay? If you are selling to your local college kids as teenagers are not an immunocompetent population. They are not adults. They are immunologically, they are just not adults. And so you have to plan for that. Now, most university buying systems will understand that they are not selling to an immunocompetent population, but plan on that, because there's generally extra testing that you have to do. There's not a whole lot more food safety that you have to do, but there's probably going to be extra testing that you have to do, and you have to plan accordingly, because it's not like most institutional contracts pay all that much more, but you're going to have to plan on stricter testing standards, and potentially even stricter raw material standards and that sort of thing, depending on whether or not you are selling to an immunocompetent population. Okay, and so we have a couple of different ways that we describe our end user. You know, we talk about qualified end users, and that actually now, thanks to the FDA, has a legal definition about who a qualified end user is, and that's the person who, you know, is immunocompetent and actually eating your food. That's your qualified end user. When we write HACCP plans here, we generally say these products, you know, if they are in fact intended for an immunocompetent population, we say the products are intended for immunocompetent adult end users. Unless we are selling ground beef into the school lunch program, and then we say, you know, this is designed for a school, you know, a school age population. This is designed for a hospital population, veterans populations. You know, I am a veteran, so I work with veterans. If you're selling to the VA home, that's not an immunocompetent population. I hate to say, but we're really not. And so that's how you actually list it. It's not that hard to list it in your food safety documentation, but figuring out who your target market is and then who your consumer is and how they're actually consuming your food can actually be fairly challenging. There tends to be, especially on the target market side, a lot of drama that's associated with that. You know, we want to sell everything to everybody. I'm here to tell you, you're not Oprah. I'm not Oprah. You can't sell everything to everybody. If you narrow in on a target market and you work on marketing to that target market, it doesn't mean you're not going to sell to other people. It means you're going to spend all your time, money, and effort in where you think you're going to get the most profit out of your business. All right, so that is our conversation about target markets and intended consumers. I'm happy to take questions. I'm going to give everybody a moment to absorb all of that, and then we're going to move on to a refrigeration question, actually, because that came up on the page this week, and I think everybody was munching popcorn while we were posting about that yesterday. All right, so if nobody has questions about that, let's talk a little bit about refrigeration. So we have standards in the USDA, we have standards in the food code, and we have standards of the FDA for refrigeration. There are United States standards, there are Canadian standards, there are EFSA, the European Food Safety Administration standards. All right, there are FAO standards, the Food and Agriculture Organization. Guess what, everybody? These standards can be different. Okay. Your standard for refrigerating food, if you're a USDA plant, is going to be different than your standard for refrigerating food if you're an FDA fisheries plant. All right. FDA fisheries for mollusk and shellfish, we refrigerate at 45. Because if you don't refrigerate it at 45, your mollusk and shellfish dies, and then you can't sell it, and you have other problems. All right, and so what's really incredibly important is to understand what regulatory authority you are working under. Under a lot of food codes, you only have to refrigerate at 41 degrees. Under FDA, you often only have to refrigerate under 41 degrees, sometimes under 45 degrees. Under the USDA, you have to refrigerate under 40 degrees. If you are doing reduced oxygen packaging of fully cooked food under the USDA, you have to refrigerate under 38 degrees. Same thing with the FDA. If you've got reduced oxygen packaged fully cooked fish, you got to refrigerate under 38 degrees. Why this difference? Well, it depends on the pathogens that we're talking about, okay? The whole 38-degree thing is because we're worried about botulism in reduced oxygen packaging. If you have a fully cooked or otherwise ready-to-eat product that doesn't have a whole lot of pathogens associated with it and doesn't have any nitrites associated with it, the only way that you can control botulism in your reduced oxygen packaging is through your cold process, okay? And botulism grows at 40 degrees. It doesn't grow below 38 degrees, and that's the difference. There are lots of different things that we can talk about multiple barriers to pathogen growth, but when we're talking about refrigeration, that's basically what we're talking about. Pathogens of concern in unrefrigerated processing over on the meat and poultry side of the house, Salmonella, Campylobacter, and Shigatoxin E. coli. If you are processing in an unrefrigerated manner, those pathogens have the ability and the propensity to grow. Now, do they grow much between 40 and 50 degrees? No, they don't grow much between 40 and 50 degrees. But bacteria grows exponentially. We have what's called logarithmic growth of pathogens. And that means it goes along like really, really fairly kind of steady. And, you know, we go 1 log, 2 logs. But, you know, if you start increasing that a lot, logarithmic growth will eventually get you that hockey stick before everything starts dying. And the danger zone that we talk about in processing is that logarithmic growth, okay, of production of bacteria. All right. And that's why we do things under refrigeration. Okay. Now, we have had previous conversations about what you need in your food safety plan, you know, that we process everything under 40 or that we keep our refrigerators under 40. That is your food safety planning. I highly recommend having operational limits in addition to your critical limits so that you never exceed your critical limits. You know, and our operational limits for most folks around refrigeration are in the 36 to 38 degree range, because you don't want your refrigerators to get up to 40 degrees and then you have a problem, because that's expensive. If you catch everything and you fix your refrigerator, your cooler, when you're at 38 degrees, it's going to make a really big difference. So that's refrigeration. I will tell you, it's an awful lot when you're doing refrigeration. Try and take your thermometer or your data logger or whatever and put it in in water, and so that the water stays a uniform temperature, because coolers and stuff go through defrost cycles. And if your inspector sees those defrost cycles and you have a limit of 40 degrees and, well, it hits 45 on its defrost cycle, then you've exceeded your critical limit. That's the kind of stuff that you have to think about when we're talking about refrigerated processing, refrigerated storage, all that good sort of stuff. So anyway, so that's some of the stuff that I have seen on the page this week. I'm trying to think if I've seen anything else or anything else crazy. We've had a really big recall on eggs. Millions of eggs got recalled. It's kind of crazy. So know your farmer, know your food. Oh, good questions. Yay, Joseph. I can always count on you for a question. It makes me feel like somebody's listening, which I know people are because I can see how many. But is there a USA standard for the temperature of a drying room for salumi and cold smoking chamber? Okay, these are amazing questions. Thank you so much, Joseph, for, I don't know, is it Joseph or Joseph, for asking these. Okay. The short answer is no. Okay. There is, if you are making a fermented ground product, okay, so like salami or any of the, you know, like the saucisson, saucisse sèche, that sort of thing, saucisse de Toulouse, we have temperatures for which you have to get your fermentation under a certain pH level. Okay, so you have between certain temperature parameters, so between 60 and 90 degrees, you have 1200 degree hours in which to get your sausage, your batter it's called, down below a pH of 5.3. If you are fermenting, if you're doing like a fast ferment and you're above 90 and below 100, I think you have 800 degree hours, but don't quote me on that. There's the dry and semi-dry sausages in the files that we can go look that up in. But I think you have 800 degree hours, okay, within which to get your pH below 5.3. And here's how we calculate degree hours. You take the temperature that you are fermenting your sausage at, okay, 65, 70 degrees. Let's use 70 because it's a round number. You subtract 60 out of it, because below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, you do not have to keep track of degree hours, all right? This is my bias speaking here. I like sausages and meats that are fermented and dried slow and cold. It's a feature, not a bug in my life, because it brings out the taste of the pork, in my opinion. Okay. And so you take out, so if you're fermenting at 70 degrees, okay, you take away 60 of those degrees because the USDA doesn't really care up to 60 degrees for your ferment, because there's other there's a lot of bacteria that can compete with pathogenic bacteria. All right, so that gives you 10 degrees. All right, you have 1,200 degree hours in which your pH has to drop to 5.3. All right, so and you're of those degree hours, you only have 10 degrees to play with, so you have 120 hours in which to get that pH drop, because 10 times 120 is 1,200, and that's your 1,200 degree hours. Okay, so that's hot fermentation. Cold fermentation is actually anything under 60 degrees, Jake. All right, and there are, I think, and we'd have to talk to Evan about this, but I think that there are bacterial strains that ferment better under 60 degrees. And I would talk to whoever you buy your ferment culture from about that, and whether or not you can get strains that ferment at lower temperatures, like mesophilic strains, kind of like that we talk about. And if you're actually doing it cold under 40, you're going to take a really long time to ferment, and that's okay, because you can ferment and dry out and create actually a ready to eat product without it ever going above 40 degrees. It will take a long time. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, it's gonna take a long time. But it's a less complicated HACCP plan, because all you're basically doing is drying something out and creating a drier, colder product, and then you can write your HACCP plan accordingly. Evan Brady, and I think he still sells through Butcher and Packer, though if one of my admins is here, somebody correct me on that if I'm wrong. They distribute fermentation bacteria. Okay, so that's the whole ferment thing. If you ferment under 60 degrees, then the USDA lets you take as long as you want to get your pH drop, and it will eventually get there. I mean, bacteria still metabolizes. All right, now cold smoking. Cold smoking. There's no definition of cold smoking. All right. And when you are, quote, cold smoking something, and you are doing something to create a cold smoke, I'm not gonna lie, those are complicated HACCP plans, because taking a product into what we generally consider the cold smoke zone, which is, honestly, I've talked to people for whom 120 degrees is a cold smoke zone, but 85 degrees is also a cold smoke zone. Craft Butcher Pantry. Okay, thanks. Thanks. I knew he worked for one of the distributors. Sorry. So Evan, if you get this, sorry about that. Craft Butcher's Pantry, we love them. Evan Brady, that's who you need to talk to. So the cold smoking can be really, really complicated, and what you need to be able to figure out is the cumulative time associated with your cold smoking. Now, over on the fisheries side of the house, they've laid this out incredibly clearly. On the USDA side of the house, they have not. All right, so there is information out there, and I have to go dig through my validation, and I'll see what I can post. But you have to basically be able to prove that you're not causing a hazard with your cold smoking. If you're making a not heat-treated, a heat-treated, not fully cooked, not shelf-stable product, which is bacon, basically, there's a lot of forgiveness in it, because your end user is going to cook the product. If you are cold smoking something that is then going to be a not heat-treated, shelf-stable product, you have to work that cold smoking basically into either your fermentation, and you're saying, okay, well, I'm going to ferment and smoke at the same time, which would be a little complicated, but probably doable, or into your drying process, okay, and prove somewhere in your drying that you have controlled sufficiently for hazards that at the temperature that you're going to cold smoke, 85 degrees, 90 degrees, whatever it is, you're not going to cause bacterial proliferation, which is basically going to mean your meat is going to, whether it's ground or not ground, is going to have to be dry enough that your bacteria isn't going to multiply. on that. Okay, what I will do for that, there's a chart that we have in the fisheries HACCP, which I'm not going to lie, I have submitted to the USDA and they have accepted, because bacteria is bacteria. I will post that, and you can kind of look at the pathogens in question and what your actual process is, and then feel free, if I mean, if it's not a secret, like a trade secret process, post it on the page, and we'll have people take a look at it. Okay, and we'd be happy to talk about that sort of stuff. That's what the admins are here for, pick our brains. We'd like people to, make delicious salt cured products. If you feel like paying me, by all means, I take payment, and I take payment from people in the page and product. So I'm happy to be a taste tester. Okay, so I mean, cold smoking, that's one of the reasons we have so many conversations about it on the page, is because it's complicated. I'm not, the stuff we do is complicated, and from a regulatory perspective, it is also fairly complicated. So I hope that answered your question. Oops, it is now 4:30. I gotta go talk to my friends over at NC Choices. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm Dr. Michelle Fainensteel. This has been Salt Cured Pig Live Office Hours. We'll come to you again next week. I'm not sure what time, but next week we're going to be doing process flow diagramming, so you're definitely going to want to tune in for that, because I'm going to be going through a process flow diagram for a bacon process, which I know a lot of you are probably interested in. So anyway, thank you so much. As always, ask questions, ping us. If something seems wrong, let an admin know, that good sort of stuff. All right, y'all have a great afternoon. Thank you so much for tuning in. It means the world to me to have you guys here. I love talking to you. I love everybody on the Salt Cured Pig. And you guys have a great afternoon. Thanks so much.